The smoke in the cantina was thick enough to choke a Vorthan, but Vexter didn't mind. He'd been breathing worse air for decades. The establishment sat on the outer rim of Kepler's Rest, a space station that attracted the kind of beings who preferred to avoid questions about their past. Perfect for someone like him. His forearms moved with practiced efficiency as he nursed his third glass of Altarian whiskey. Each limb bore scars that told stories: plasma burns from the Battle of Rigel, claw marks from hand-to-hand combat on Zarian Prime, and the deep grooves where human bullets had found their mark during the siege of Luna Station. His reptilian hide, once a vibrant green, had faded to a dull olive color, marked by the silver lines of old wounds that refused to heal completely. The cantina's patrons gave him a wide berth. Word traveled fast in places like this, and everyone knew what the scars meant. Vexter was one of the few Coalition veterans who'd fought humans and lived to tell about it. Most who survived those battles didn't talk about them. The smart ones pretended they'd never happened at all. Zilliva had been watching him for 3 days before she worked up the courage to approach. She was young, maybe 30 cycles old, with the bright purple skin and eager eyes of a Calorian journalist fresh out of the core worlds. Her recording device trembled slightly in her hands as she crossed the cantina floor, stepping over passed-out smugglers and avoiding the suspicious glances of arms dealers. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely audible over the cantina's background noise. "Are you veteran Vexter of the 47th Assault Legion?" Vexteress's yellow eyes fixed on her unblinking. He'd been expecting this conversation for years. The war had ended 2 decades ago, but recently, historians and journalists had started asking questions. The coalition government preferred to keep the details classified, but old soldiers had loose tongues when they'd had enough to drink. "Depends who's asking," he replied, his voice like gravel sliding down a metal chute. "And why they want to know." Zilliva sat down without invitation, placing her recording device on the scarred metal table between them. "I'm Zilliva from Galactic News Network. I'm researching the Human Coalition War for a documentary series. The official records are mostly classified, but survivors like you, ... survivors." Vexter's mandibles clicked a sound that made Zilliva's skin crawl. It might have been laughter, but there was no humor in it. That's one way to put it. "Most of my species prefers the term witnesses to catastrophe." He drained his glass in one gulp and signaled the bartender for another. The four-armed Nexarian behind the bar knew better than to keep a Thrakari veteran waiting. Within seconds, a fresh glass appeared, along with the bottle. "The human war," Vexter continued, staring into the amber liquid. "Child, you have no idea what you're asking. The Coalition fought 17 different species before we encountered humans. We conquered worlds, absorbed civilizations, expanded our territory across half the galaxy. Every species we met followed the same pattern: initial resistance, negotiation, surrender, integration. It was almost routine." Zilliva leaned forward, her recording device capturing every word. "But humans were different? Different?" Vexter's laugh was harsh enough to make nearby patrons look up nervously. "They weren't just different, they were impossible. They broke every rule we thought we knew about warfare, about species behavior, about survival itself." He took a sip of his drink and continued. "The initial intelligence reports described Earth as a backwater planet populated by a primitive species that had barely achieved interplanetary travel. They fought amongst themselves constantly. Their technology was crude, and their military forces were scattered and uncoordinated. The Kai Command classified it as a Category 3 conquest. Minimal resistance expected. Complete pacification within 1 standard month. I was a strike commander then," Vexter said, his voice growing distant. "Fourth Claw of the 47th Assault Legion, commanding 200 of the Coalition's finest warriors. We'd taken 17 worlds without losing more than a handful of troops. Earth was supposed to be a training exercise for the new recruits." The cantina's noise seemed to fade as other patrons unconsciously moved away from their table. Even hardened criminals and smugglers could sense when someone was about to tell a story that would give them nightmares. The Coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol. System on what humans call March 15th, 2387. 300 ships, including 5 dreadnoughts and 2 planet crackers. Enough firepower to glass a dozen worlds. Admiral Korthok himself commanded the operation from the flagship Dominion's Wrath. Vexther's eyes unfocused as he remembered. The first thing we noticed was how quickly the humans detected our arrival. Their primitive sensor networks should have taken hours to spot us. But within minutes, every human military installation in the system was broadcasting emergency signals. They knew we were coming, and they knew what it meant. Standard protocol called for a demonstration of force, he continued. We targeted 3 of their largest population centers, New York, Shanghai, and Mumbai. Not to destroy them completely, just enough to show the humans what resistance would cost them. The orbital bombardment lasted exactly 17 minutes. Zilava shifted uncomfortably. How many casualties? 47 million humans died in those 17 minutes, Vexther said flatly. The Coalition had never killed so many sentient beings in a single operation. We expected immediate surrender broadcasts from every human government. Instead, we got silence. Complete communications blackout for 6 hours. He paused to take another drink, his hands steady, despite the terrible memories. Then their leader spoke, a human named Haiyan Wu, their global defense coordinator. He appeared on every screen, every communication device, every piece of human technology, simultaneously. I'll never forget his words because they were broadcast in 17 different languages, including our own. Vexther's voice changed, taking on the cadence of someone reciting something burned into their memory. To the species that has chosen to murder our children today, you have taught us what we are truly made of. You believe we will surrender because you have shown us your strength. Instead, you have shown us our own. Every human who died today will be remembered. Every human who lives will ensure you regret this moment for whatever remains of your existence. Transmission lasted exactly 3 minutes. Vexther continued. When it ended, something had changed. Our sensors detected massive energy spikes across the planet. Factory complexes were converting to weapons production, and civilian populations were mobilizing. Children were being evacuated to underground shelters that hadn't existed hours before. Admiral Korthok ordered a second bombardment, targeting their military installations. We destroyed their primary spaceports, their largest naval bases, their command centers. 90% of their organized military was eliminated in the first day. By Coalition standards, Earth should have surrendered immediately. Vexther's mandibles clicked again, but this time it sounded like fear. Instead, they started fighting back with whatever they had left. Commercial spacecraft loaded with nuclear weapons began ramming our outer patrol ships. Human pilots who should have ejected when their fighters were damaged instead flew them directly into our vessels. Their ground forces, what was left of them, began tactics we'd never seen before. That's when Command decided to proceed with the ground invasion, he said. The 47th Legion was assigned to secure the North American continent. We thought we were mopping up scattered resistance. We were wrong. We were just getting started on the worst experience of our lives. The veteran fell silent, staring at his reflection in the amber liquid. Around them, the cantina had grown quiet, as if the very walls were listening to his story. That's enough for tonight, Vexther said finally. Some stories need to be told, in the proper order, or they lose their meaning. Come back tomorrow, child. Bring a stronger recorder and a stronger stomach. The real horror hasn't even started yet. Zilava returned the next evening, finding Vexther in the same corner booth. The cantina was quieter tonight, as word had spread about the old veteran's stories. Even the roughest smugglers seemed to sense that something dark was being shared. At that table, you came back, Vexther observed, his yellow eyes studying the young journalist. Most beings would have found an excuse to stay away after yesterday's conversation. I'm not most beings, Zilava replied, settling into her chair and activating her recording device. Tell me about Luna Station. Vexther's 4 hands wrapped around his glass, and for a moment, his scarred face showed something that might have been pain. Luna Station. The place where the Coalition learned that humans don't understand the concept of hopeless odds. Took a long drink before continuing. After the initial bombardment of Earth, High Command decided to secure the human lunar installations. Luna Station was their primary mining and research facility, built into the side of an old crater. Intelligence reports showed maybe 300 humans stationed there, mostly scientists, engineers, and a small security force. We sent 10,000 troops to take it. 10,000 against 300, Zilova whispered. Those numbers should have meant total victory within hours, Vexler finished. The siege lasted 47 standard days, 47 days of the most brutal fighting any coalition force had ever experienced. What should have been a simple mop-up operation became our first real glimpse into human madness. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. It was part of the initial assault wave. 200 of us in full combat armor, armed with plasma rifles and pulse cannons. We approached the station expecting token resistance, maybe a few desperate shots, before they surrendered. Instead, we found something that defied all logic. The humans had turned their entire facility into a fortress, he continued. Every corridor was a kill zone. Every room was a trap. They had spent the 6 days between Earth's bombardment and our arrival transforming a research station into something that would have impressed the war builders of Kurok Prime. Vexler's mandibles clicked as he remembered. Their commander was a human named Dong Hian. His former military, but he'd been running mining operations for the past decade. Intelligence said he was a bureaucrat, not a warrior. They were wrong about that too. Dong Hian's first communication to our assault commander was simple. You are not welcome here. Leave now, or we will teach you the meaning of regret. Our commander laughed. Imagine 300 primitives threatening 10,000. Coalition soldiers. The cantina's ambient noise seemed to fade as Vexler's story drew in everyone within earshot. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. The first attack came at dawn. Earth time, Vexler continued. We hit the main airlock. With enough firepower to crack a battleship's hull, the blast doors held for maybe 30 seconds before giving way. My squad was first through the breach, expecting to find panicked humans cowering in the corridors. Instead, we found Commander Dong Hian waiting for us in the main tunnel. He was standing there in a mining suit, holding what looked like a modified plasma cutter. He looked at us for a moment, then spoke into his cum unit. Phase 1, execute. Vexler, S. Hands trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. The entire tunnel system exploded. Not all at once. That would have been too merciful. Section by section, in a carefully timed sequence that drove us forward into deeper traps. They had rigged their own home to collapse on us, and they were. Inside, when they triggered it, 73 coalition soldiers died in that first hour, he said. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the humans kept broadcasting. Every explosion, every trap, every casualty was accompanied by their voices over the comm system. Not screaming or crying, talking, giving status reports, sharing tactical information, even joking with each other. I heard one human, a woman, named So Young, reporting to her commander while half the tunnel system was collapsing around her. She said, Section 7 is clear. Estimate 15 enemy casualties. Proceeding to Section 8, her voice was as calm as if she was reading a shopping list. Zilava leaned forward, her recording device capturing every word. How did they survive the explosions? They didn't, mostly, Vexler replied. That's what we couldn't understand. They were dying to kill us, but they were doing it with such precision, such planning. Every death served a purpose. Every sacrifice bought them something. 5. We finally breached the main operations center, he continued. We found their chief engineer, a human named Ji-Wan, working at a damaged console. Half the room was on fire, the atmosphere was venting through hull breaches, and she was welding plasma conduits with her bare hands. Her flesh was literally burning away, but she kept working. Vexler's voice became barely audible. When she saw us, she looked up and smiled. Actually smiled. Her face was a mess of burns and radiation damage, but she smiled like she was greeting old friends. Then she said something I'll never forget. Right on time, she triggered a plasma overload that vaporized half my squad and blew a hole in the station's outer hull. The explosion should have killed her instantly, he added. Instead, she lived long enough to activate 3 more overloads in different sections of the station. She crawled from console to console, dying by inches, turning their own equipment into weapons against us. That's when we realized we weren't fighting a normal military force, Vexter continued. These humans had somehow turned their entire civilian population into soldiers. The miners, the scientists, the maintenance workers, they all fought like they had been training for war their entire lives. Bioram was a tunneling specialist, he said.
Ow.
His job was to dig mining shafts. When we encountered him on day 15, he had converted his drilling equipment into something that could punch through our armor like paper. He took out an entire assault team before we could stop him. Their medical officer Yunji was even worse, Vexter added. She knew exactly where to place her improvised explosive devices to cause maximum damage to our species. Her surgical knowledge let her target our weak points with terrifying precision. She turned healing tools into instruments of death. But the breaking point came on day 28, he said, his voice growing thick with emotion. We had finally cornered the last group of defenders in the station's reactor chamber. Maybe 20 humans left, surrounded by 200 coalition soldiers. They should have surrendered. Instead, their youngest fighter volunteered for one final mission, Vexer continued. His name was Teho. 10 years old, barely an adult by human standards. He was a maintenance worker, someone who fixed air recyclers and cleaned waste systems. Not a soldier, not a warrior, just a kid who maintained machinery. He crawled through the ventilation system with a fusion charge strapped to his chest, the veteran whispered. We didn't even know he was there until he dropped into our command center. 30 officers, including our sector commander, were planning. The final assault, when this human child fell from the ceiling, Teho looked around at all of us. And his last words were broadcast throughout the station. For every human who falls, remember, we choose our deaths. We choose how we die, when we die, and who we take with us. Vexter fell silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. The explosion took out our entire command structure. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that, in his final moments, Teho looked happy. Looked like he had finally found his purpose. It's when we realized the truth. He said finally, we weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting a species that had weaponized their own mortality. It turned death itself into a tactical advantage. And the most terrifying part was that they seemed to enjoy it. The cantina had grown completely silent. Even the background music had stopped. Everyone was listening to the old veteran's words, and the weight of them hung in the air like smoke. The siege ended on day 47, Vexter concluded. Not because we won, but because there were no more humans left to fight. We had taken Luna Station, but at the cost of 8,000 coalition soldiers. 300 humans had killed or wounded 8,000 of our best troops. And Commander Dong Hyen? Zilova asked quietly. He was found in the reactor chamber. Dead at his post, Vexter replied. He had jury-rigged the entire station to explode if anyone tried to access the main computer. Even in death, he was still fighting us. Still trying to take more of us with him. The veteran drained his glass and looked directly at Zilova. That was our first lesson in human warfare. They don't fight to win. They fight to make sure you lose everything, even if it costs them everything they have. The third night, Zilova found the cantina nearly empty. Word had spread about HFY Stories, and most patrons were avoiding the place entirely. Who remained sat as far from the veteran's corner as possible, nursing their drinks in uncomfortable silence. Vexter was already waiting. 3 empty glasses lined up in front of him like fallen soldiers. His yellow eyes were more distant than before, staring at something only he could see. You're early tonight, he observed without looking up. I couldn't sleep, Zilova admitted, taking her usual seat. I kept thinking about Luna Station, about those humans who who chose death over surrender. Vexter finished. A child, that was nothing compared to what came next. Luna Station taught us that humans were dangerous when cornered. Ain't. But the Ghost Fleet taught us that humans were even more dangerous when they were supposed to be dead. He gestured to the bartender for another drink, his movements slower than usual. After Luna Station, Coalition Command changed tactics. Instead of prolonged sieges, we focused on quick strikes. Hit fast, hit hard, confirm the kills, move on. Space combat was supposed to be cleaner, more predictable than ground warfare. The Ghost Fleet, Vexter whispered, and somehow the temperature in the cantina seemed to drop several degrees. That's what our pilots started calling them. Human ships that refused to stay dead. Zil_Ava activated her recording device, noticing that her hands were shaking slightly. How is that possible? For months, we couldn't figure it out, Vexer replied. Our sensors would show human vessels destroyed, massive hull damage, life support failure, reactor shutdown. We'd mark them as confirmed kills and move on to the next target. Standard procedure. He took a long drink before continuing. Then reports started coming in from our deep space patrols. Ships that had been destroyed weeks earlier were appearing behind coalition lines. At first, Command thought it was sensor errors or pilot hallucinations. Battle stress can make warriors see things that aren't there. But the attacks were real, he said grimly. Supply convoys were being hit by vessels that shouldn't exist. Troop transports were ambushed by ghosts. And every time we investigated, we found debris fields where human ships had supposedly been destroyed. Vexter's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. The first confirmed Ghost Fleet encounter happened in the Tau Ceti system. I was commanding a patrol squadron when our sensors detected a massive debris field. The remains of the human cruiser Soul's Pride, destroyed 3 weeks earlier in the Battle of Proxima. Captain Wu Jin had been commanding that vessel, he continued. We watched it die. I personally saw the hull breach, watched the atmosphere venting into space. The ship's reactor had gone critical, and the explosion was visible from 3 systems. Away, there was no way anyone could have survived. But there it was, Vex_Tar whispered. Floating dead in space, exactly where our tactical computers said it should be, except something was wrong. The debris pattern was too organized, too neat. Real explosions don't leave wreckage in perfect formations. Zil_Ava leaned forward, her recording device capturing every word. What did you find? We sent a boarding party to investigate, Vex_Tar replied. Standard salvage operation, check for survivors, recover any useful technology, then move on. My Lieutenant Corex led the team aboard the wreck. The hull was cracked open like an egg, he continued. Most of the ship was exposed to vacuum, filled with frozen debris and ice crystals. It looked exactly like every other battlefield wreck we'd seen. But when Corex reached the engineering section, he found something impossible. Vex_Tar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The compartment was sealed and pressurized. Life support was running on emergency power. And inside, 23 human crew members were alive and working. Alive? Zil_Ava gasped. After 3 weeks in space, Captain Wu Jin had sealed his surviving crew in the most protected part of the ship, Vex_Tar explained. When we destroyed the Soul's Pride, the engineering section remained intact. The humans had spent 3 weeks in the dark, in the cold. Manually maintaining life support systems while they worked on something, they were repairing their ship. No, Vex_Tar said, his eyes growing distant. They were turning it into a weapon. Chief Engineer Sung Ho had spent those 3 weeks rigging the reactor to overload on command. It's not a random explosion, a controlled detonation that could be triggered at exactly the right moment. Weapons Officer The Jin had converted every escape pod into a guided missile, he continued. The ship's stores of emergency supplies had been turned into explosives. Even their water recycling system had been modified to produce chemical weapons. And they had been waiting, Vex_Tar added. For 3 weeks, they sat in that frozen compartment, waiting for a coalition ship to come close enough to investigate. They knew we would eventually send a salvage team. The cantina's few remaining patrons had grown completely silent, drawn in by the veteran's story despite their fear. The moment Corax's team boarded the wreck, the humans triggered their trap. Vex_Tar continued. The Soul's Pride wasn't dead. It was a predator playing dead, waiting for prey to come close enough to strike. The attack was devastating, he said. Sung Ho triggered a partial reactor overload that propelled the wreck directly into our formation. The Jin's converted escape pods launched like missiles, each one targeting a different coalition vessel. They destroyed 6 ships in the first 30 seconds. But the worst part came When we tried to board the wreck afterward, Vex_Tar whispered, we found their personal logs. The humans had documented everything, their repairs, their plans, their preparations. They had even drawn straws to see who would stay behind to trigger the final explosion. Who won? Dill_Ava asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. A young communications officer named Subin, Vex_Tar, replied, 24 years old, fresh out of their naval academy. She should have been terrified, but her final log entry was calm, almost cheerful, recorded a message for her family. I'm not dying today. I'm completing my mission. Tell my parents I chose this, and I'm proud of my choice. Subin stayed. At her post, while the rest of the crew evacuated in the few working escape pods, he continued. She waited until our rescue ships were close enough, then triggered the final explosion. Took out 2 more coalition vessels and damaged 3 others. Vex_Tar fell silent for a moment, staring at his hands. That was when we realized the humans had learned something terrible. They had figured out how to fake their own deaths so convincingly that our sensors couldn't tell the difference between a destroyed ship and a ship pretending to be destroyed. The ghost fleet grew with every battle, he said. Every human vessel we thought we had destroyed became a potential ambush. Every debris field became a hunting ground. Our patrol routes had to be completely reorganized because nowhere was safe anymore. Human Captain Minjun perfected the technique with his destroyer Busan Thunder. Vex_Tar continued. He would position his ship near asteroid fields, then trigger controlled explosions that made it look like his vessel had been destroyed. Our sensors would register the explosion, confirm the kill, and mark the area as cleared. Days or weeks later, Coalition supply convoys would pass through those same asteroid fields, he said. The Busan Thunder would emerge from the rocks like a hunting beast, attack with everything it had, then disappear back into the debris before reinforcements could arrive. Engineer Haewon turned her cargo hauler into a floating bomb. Vex_Tar added she would hide among genuine wreckage, waiting for coalition salvage teams. When they came close enough, she would trigger explosives that had been built into her ship's hull. She destroyed 12 coalition vessels before we finally caught her, but the most terrifying Ghost Fleet captain was a woman named Yoon Young, he whispered. She commanded a small research vessel called the Incheon Star. Nothing impressive, barely armed. Lightly armored, designed for scientific missions. Yoon Young turned that research ship into something that haunted coalition nightmares. Vex_Tar continued. She would fake distress calls, pretending her vessel was damaged and drifting. When coalition ships approached to investigate, they would find what looked like a helpless civilian craft filled with terrified scientists. But it was all an act, he said. The scientists were actually human Marines in disguise. The damage was carefully staged to look convincing. And Captain Yoon Young was recording everything, studying our boarding procedures, learning our weaknesses. Once our teams were inside her ship, Yoon Young would seal the airlocks and flood the compartments with poisonous gas, Vex_Tar explained. Then her disguised Marines would board our vessels and take them from the inside. She captured 7 coalition ships that way before we figured out her trick. The veteran drained his glass and looked directly at Zil_Ava. The Ghost Fleet taught us that humans had weaponized deception itself. They could fake their own death so convincingly that even our best sensors couldn't tell the difference. Every battle became a gamble because we never knew which human ships were actually destroyed and which ones were just waiting for the right moment to strike back. Death was supposed to be final, he concluded. But humans taught us that even death was just another tactic in their arsenal. They turned dying into a military strategy, and somehow they made it work. The 4th night brought rain to Kepler's rest station, water droplets, pattering against the cantina's reinforced windows like tiny fists, demanding entry. Vexler sat alone in his corner booth, for empty bottles arranged before him like a shrine to forgotten horrors. His yellow eyes were bloodshot, and his scarred hands shook slightly as he reached for his glass. Zilova approached cautiously. Over the past 3 nights, she had watched the veteran deteriorate before her eyes. Each story seemed to tear something loose inside him, as if speaking these memories aloud was slowly killing him. "You don't have to continue," she said softly. Settling into her chair, "This is too difficult, ... No, Vexter interrupted, his voice rough as broken glass. "These stories need to be told. The galaxy needs to understand what humans are capable of when they're pushed beyond their breaking point." He gestured weakly at the empty cantina around them. "Notice how we're alone tonight. Word has spread. Even the hardest criminals in this sector are afraid to hear what comes next." Zileva activated her recording device, her hands steadier than they had been in days. She was learning that fear, like everything else, could become routine with enough exposure. "Tell me about the broken chain," she said. Vexter's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound like chattering teeth in the cold. "The broken chain. That's what coalition historians call it now, though they prefer not to talk about it at all. It was the moment when the coalition high command decided to abandon every principle we claimed to fight for. After Luna Station and the Ghost Fleet incidents, the war had dragged on for 8 months," he continued. "Coalition casualties were mounting faster than command had ever seen. Public support for the war was collapsing across member worlds. Something had to be done to end the conflict quickly. Admiral Vekmer proposed a final solution," Vexter said, his voice becoming hollow. "If humans were so attached to their families, their civilians, their non-combatants, then those attachments could be used as weapons against them. Break their spirit by destroying what they fought to protect." Zileva felt a chill run down her spine. "They targeted civilian populations?" "The bombing of New Geneva was meant to be the decisive blow," Vexer confirmed. "A demonstration so terrible that even humans would have to surrender. The city housed 2 million civilians, families, children, elderly beings who had never held a weapon in their lives. I wasn't part of the orbital bombardment fleet," he continued, "but I watched the tactical feeds from the command ship. 17 dreadnoughts positioned in high orbit, their planet cracker weapons aimed at a single target. The bombardment lasted for 6 hours. The veteran's voice dropped to barely a whisper. 2 million humans died that day. The city was reduced to radioactive glass that still glows in the dark 40 years later. It was the single largest loss of civilian life in Coalition history. We had become the monsters our propaganda always claimed we were fighting against." "Command waited for the surrender broadcast," Vexter said. "We expected the human government to contact us within hours, maybe days at most. No species could witness such destruction and continue fighting. It was psychologically impossible. Instead, we got silence for 12 hours, he continued. Then a transmission came from the ruins of New Geneva itself. A single human survivor had built a makeshift transmitter from the wreckage of his city. Vexer's hands trembled as he reached for his drink. His name was Jamin, schoolteacher, 34 years old. Radiation burns covered half his face, and his left arm was gone. He should have been dying, but there he was, speaking calmly into his improvised communicator. "What did he say?" Zileva asked, though part of her didn't. "Want to know?" "His exact words were recorded by every coalition listening post in the system," Vexer replied. He said, "Thank you for showing us who you really are. He had wondered if there might be some honor left in your species, some line you wouldn't cross. Now we know better. Now we'll show you who we are." The transmission lasted only 90 seconds, he continued. But in that time, Jamin announced that humanity was formally abandoning the Geneva Conventions, the galactic rules of war, and every other agreement that had governed civilized conflict. They were done fighting like soldiers. From that moment forward, they would fight like something else entirely. Within hours, reports began flooding in from across human space, Vexter said. Every human civilian had become a combatant, not just adults, everyone, children, elderly beings, even the sick and injured. An entire species had declared total war. "I saw the intelligence reports," he continued. A 12-year-old human named Haywan had learned to build explosives from common household chemicals. She took out a coalition patrol with a bomb made from cleaning supplies and fertilizer. When we interrogated the surviving members of her cell, they said she had been teaching other children the same techniques. Elderly humans like Minho and Sunya became intelligence assets, Vexter added. They used their decades of experience to study coalition psychology, finding weaknesses in our mental conditioning. They designed interrogation techniques that could break a Thrakari warrior's mind in minutes. The cantina's lights flickered, casting strange shadows across Vextharez's scarred face. But the worst part wasn't the violence. It was how organized they became. A human teacher named Na Young had converted her school into a training center for child spies. Students who should have been learning mathematics and literature were instead being taught surveillance techniques and sabotage methods. These children would approach coalition checkpoints pretending to be refugees, he explained. They looked innocent, frightened, helpless. Our soldiers would let them pass, sometimes even giving them food or medical attention. Hours later, coalition supply depots would explode, communication arrays would fail, or patrol routes would be compromised. Na Young's network spread across the galaxy, Vexthar continued. Every human child became a potential intelligence asset. They were small, seemingly harmless, and could go places that adult humans couldn't. But behind those young faces were minds that had been trained to think like military strategists. Even worse was Dr. Young-Soo, the veteran said, his voice cracking. He was a surgeon, trained to save lives. After New Geneva, he volunteered to treat coalition prisoners of war. Our command was pleased. It showed that some humans still maintained professional ethics. But Young-Soo had his own agenda, Vexthar explained. While he performed surgery on our wounded soldiers, he was also transmitting detailed medical data to human military analysts. Every operation taught the humans exactly where to strike our species for maximum damage. Every healing procedure revealed new vulnerabilities they could exploit. He saved the lives of coalition prisoners during the day, the veteran continued. At night, he used the knowledge he had gained to help human resistance fighters kill coalition soldiers more efficiently. He turned the act of healing into a form of intelligence gathering. That's when we realized what had happened, Vexthar said. The bombing of New Geneva hadn't broken human morale. It had freed them from the moral constraints that had been limiting their war effort. We had taught them that mercy was weakness, that civilians were legitimate targets, that honor was a luxury they couldn't afford. So they discarded mercy entirely, he continued. They abandoned honor, threw away compassion, and became something beyond soldiers, beyond warriors. They became a force of nature with a single purpose: our complete annihilation. Every human became a weapon, Vexthar whispered. Not just the military personnel, but everyone. Teachers became spy masters. Doctors became interrogators. Children became saboteurs. Even their elderly became tactical assets. They didn't just fight back, he said. They evolved. In a matter of weeks, humanity transformed from a species constrained by ethics and morality into something that viewed total war as the only acceptable response to our aggression. Coalition psychologists tried to analyze what had happened, Vexthar continued. They concluded that humans possess a unique ability to adapt their behavior to match the level of threat they face. When we fought them honorably, they responded with honor. When we abandoned honor, they abandoned it too, but they were much better at being monsters than we ever were. The reports from occupied human worlds became increasingly disturbing. He said human resistance cells were using coalition rules of engagement against us. Since we had declared civilians to be legitimate targets, they began targeting our civilian support staff, our medical personnel, our non-combatant specialists. But they did it with a precision and efficiency that terrified our commanders, Vexthar added. Human attacks weren't random acts of vengeance. They were carefully calculated strikes designed to cause maximum psychological damage to coalition forces. A human cell leader named Dong-Su began broadcasting the names and home addresses of coalition soldiers to resistance networks across the galaxy. He continued. He wasn't threatening their families. He was letting our troops know that he could threaten their families whenever he chose to. The psychological effect was devastating. The veteran fell silent for a long moment, staring at his reflection in the bottom of his empty glass. That's what the broken chain really means, he finally said. It was the moment when humanity broke free from the moral constraints that make civilized warfare possible. We had pushed them beyond their breaking point, and what emerged was something that didn't just want to defeat us, It wanted to ensure we could never threaten anyone again. They became our nightmares made flesh, Vexter concluded. And the most terrifying part was that they seemed to enjoy it. After New Geneva, humans fought with a joy, an enthusiasm for destruction that made even our most brutal warriors uncomfortable. They had found their true calling, and that calling was our complete and utter annihilation. The fifth night found the cantina completely empty except for Vexter and Zilliva. Even the bartender had retreated to the back room, unwilling to listen to what everyone knew would be the darkest chapter of the veteran's tale. The silence was so complete that the hum of the station's life support systems seemed deafeningly loud. Vexter sat slumped in his booth, looking like a being who had aged decades in just 5 days. His forearms lay motionless on the table, and his yellow eyes had lost their fire. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Tonight I tell you about the reckoning," he said. "The moment when the Coalition learned that some wars can't be won, only survived." Zilliva activated her recording device, her hands steadier now. After 4 nights of horror stories, she had developed a kind of immunity to fear. Or maybe she had simply run out of room for more terror. After the broken chain, the war had raged for 2 full years, Vexter began. Coalition casualties numbered in the millions. Entire fleets had been destroyed by human tactics that defied every rule of warfare we thought we knew. Our member worlds were beginning to question whether the conquest of Earth was worth the price we were paying. That's when the Coalition Council made one final decision, he continued. Admiral Cruix, the most decorated military commander in galactic history, was given unlimited resources and a simple mandate: end the human threat permanently. Cruix assembled the largest fleet in recorded history, Vexter said. 15,000 ships from across the galaxy. Every Coalition species contributed their finest vessels, their best crews, their most advanced weapons. It was a force capable of destroying entire star systems. The plan was simple, he explained. One massive strike directly at Earth itself. Overwhelm human defenses through sheer numbers, then glass the planet from orbit.
Ow.
No more human colonies to worry about. No more ghost fleet ambushes. No more impossible tactical innovations. Just silence. Zilliva leaned forward. How did humanity respond? Intelligence reports showed maybe 1,500 human ships moving to intercept our fleet in the Centauri system, Vexter replied. Admiral Cruix couldn't believe the numbers. The humans were outnumbered 10-1, facing the combined might of 17 different species. It should have been a massacre. Their fleet commander was a human named Minjin, the veteran continued. Former merchant marine captain who had been commanding human forces for barely 6 months. According to our files, he had no formal military training, no experience with large-scale fleet operations. He was exactly the kind of amateur the Coalition had been fighting throughout the war. When our fleets met at the edge of the Centauri system, Minjun opened communications, Vexter said. Admiral Cruix expected surrender negotiations, maybe a final plea for mercy. Instead, Minjun delivered a simple message: surrender now, and we'll let your homeworlds live. Admiral Cruix laughed, the veteran remembered. The audacity was incredible. 1,500 ships demanding the surrender of 15,000. Cruix's response was immediate. I'll accept nothing less than your complete extinction. The battle began with standard Coalition tactics, Vextar continued. Long-range bombardment from our dreadnoughts' fighter screens to protect the capital. Ships coordinated assault patterns that had served us well for centuries. We expected the humans to be overwhelmed within hours. But humans had evolved beyond conventional warfare, he said. They didn't fight like a traditional fleet.
Ow.
They fought like a single organism with 1,500 teeth. Came when human pilot Kyung Min flew her fighter directly at Admiral Cruix's flagship, Vexter explained. Our point defense systems tracked her approach, expecting a kamikaze attack. Instead, she ejected at the last second and her fighter crashed through the bridge viewports. But Kyung Min wasn't trying to die, he continued. She was delivering a boarding party. A dozen humans in spacesuits had been riding on the outside of her fighter, invisible to our sensors, led by a former construction worker named Byung-ho. They infiltrated the flagship's command center. Byung-ho had spent the previous year studying coalition ship designs, Vexler said. Not as a soldier, but as a civilian engineer. He knew exactly where our critical systems were located, exactly how to turn our own technology against us. Within minutes, the flagship's weapons were firing on other coalition vessels, the veteran continued. Byung-ho's team had taken control of the bridge and was using Admiral Cruex's own ship to coordinate attacks against our fleet. But that was just the beginning, Vexler whispered. The moment that truly broke us came when we realized what the humans were doing with our prisoners of war. During the battle, several coalition ships had been boarded and their crews captured, he explained. Standard procedure called for the humans to secure the prisoners and continue fighting. Instead, they brought the captured soldiers to the front lines. Human medic named Yoon-soo was treating wounded coalition troops in full view of our fleet, Vexler said. She appeared to be providing medical care, following the rules of war that humans had supposedly abandoned. Our commanders were confused but pleased. Perhaps some humanity remained in the enemy. But Yoon-soo's partner, a former data analyst named Dong-jun, was using the prisoners' biometric data for targeting information, he continued. Every heartbeat, every breath, every genetic marker was being transmitted to human weapon systems. They were using our own soldiers as living navigation beacons for their attacks. The coalition fleet tried to avoid hitting areas where our own people were located, Vexler explained. But the humans kept moving the prisoners to different positions, forcing us to choose between firing on our own troops or limiting our tactical options. It wasn't cruelty, he said. It was cold, tactical efficiency. The humans had calculated that our psychological attachment to our own soldiers was a weakness they could exploit. They were right. Ship by ship, the coalition fleet began to surrender, Vexler continued. Not because we were outgunned, but because we couldn't fight an enemy that used our own moral constraints against us. Every principle we held sacred had become a weapon in human hands. Admiral Cruex tried to negotiate a ceasefire when half his fleet had been neutralized, the veteran said. He contacted Commander Min-jun directly, offering terms for an honorable withdrawal. Min-jun's response was immediate and final, Vexler remembered. You taught us that peace is earned through strength. We're still earning it. Surrender. Completely, or we'll demonstrate what we learned from your example on New Geneva. The threat was clear, he continued. If the coalition didn't surrender, the humans would begin targeting our civilian populations with the same ruthlessness we had shown them. But they would do it better, more efficiently, with all the tactical innovation they had developed during 2 years of total war. Admiral Cruex surrendered his entire fleet, Vexter said. 15,000 ships, the pride of 17 different civilizations, handed over to 1,500 human vessels. It was the greatest military defeat in galactic history. But the humans didn't stop there, he continued. They couldn't stop. War had become their nature, their purpose, their identity. Commander Min-jun announced that humanity would continue fighting until every coalition world formally surrendered. Within days, human fleets were moving against coalition homeworlds, Vexler explained. Not to conquer them, but to force complete capitulation. They offered the same choice to every species: total surrender or total war. The Coalition Council met in emergency session, he said. Representatives from every member species gathered to discuss the unthinkable, surrendering to a species they had tried to exterminate. The debate lasted 6 hours, Vexter continued. Some species wanted to continue fighting, believing that human resources must be nearly exhausted after 2 years of war. Others argued for negotiated peace, hoping to find some middle ground. But the intelligence reports were clear, he said. Humanity wasn't weakening. They were growing stronger. Every battle taught them new tactics. Every defeat drove them to greater innovation. They had become a species that thrived on warfare itself. The vote was unanimous, Vexer whispered. Complete surrender. It's not a treaty, not a negotiation, not a ceasefire. Total capitulation to human authority. I was present when the surrender document was signed, he continued. 17 species, representing thousands of worlds and trillions of beings, formally acknowledging human supremacy. It was the end of the coalition as we knew it. But here's what still haunts me, Vexler said, his voice breaking. The moment the surrender was signed, the humans changed. Instantly, like someone had flipped a switch inside their minds. Commander Minjon, who had just conquered the galaxy, immediately began organizing humanitarian aid for coalition worlds, he explained. The same humans who had been using our prisoners as tactical assets started building hospitals for our wounded. They went from ruthless conquerors to compassionate healers in the space of a single day. That's what makes them truly terrifying, Vexler continued. Their ability to become exactly what the situation requires. They can be doctors and teachers and artists, building beautiful things and healing the sick, but they can also become something else entirely when they need to. In the years that followed, humanity proved to be surprisingly benevolent rulers, he said. They restored damaged worlds, shared advanced technology, even allowed coalition species to maintain their own governments under human oversight. Most beings forgot the war entirely, remembering only the peace that came after. But veterans like me remember, Vexler concluded. We carry the knowledge of what humans can become when they're pushed beyond their limits. We've seen what lies beneath their smiles, their kindness, their apparent gentleness. The old veteran stood slowly, his scarred form casting long shadows in the empty cantina. That's why I drink alone on the edge of known space, young one, 'cause somewhere out there, humans are laughing and singing and building wonderful things. And I know exactly what they're capable of if anyone ever threatens what they love again. The galaxy sleeps peacefully under human protection now, he said, walking toward the exit. Trade flourishes, science advances, art and culture bloom like never before. Most beings consider humanity's rule to be the greatest blessing in galactic history. But old soldiers like me whisper the same prayer every night, Vexler said, pausing at the cantina door. Let them never have cause to remember what they can become. Let them never need to be monsters again, because if they do, there's no force in the universe that can stop them. The door slid shut behind him, leaving Zileva alone with her recording device and the weight of stories that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. Outside the cantina windows, the lights of passing ships twinkled like stars, carrying beings who had no idea that their peaceful existence depended on keeping humanity content and unthreatened. In the years that followed, Zil_Ava's documentary became the most watched program in galactic history. It reminded every species of what had happened when humanity was pushed too far. And it served as a warning for future generations. The galaxy remained at peace, not because of laws or treaties or mutual understanding, but because everyone remembered Vex_Tar's final words. Humanity was content to be builders and healers and teachers, creating wonders that benefited all species. But beneath their kindness lay something that had conquered the galaxy through sheer force of will. And as long as that sleeping giant remained undisturbed, the stars would continue to shine on a universe where humans smiled and laughed and loved, never needing to remember what they had once become. The end.